Hello and welcome to today's King's Fund event. My name's Sally Warren and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's online event where we'll be looking to understand how patients access medicines in England. I'm going to explain briefly what you can expect over the next hour before I then turn to my expert panellists to introduce themselves. So here's how today will go. You'll meet the panel very briefly, and then before we get really into the detail of the discussion, Nina, one of our panellists, is going to briefly explain what the system is in England about how patients access medicines. This is quite a complicated area and lots of different parts of the system, so I hope that introductory session will just help you understand the basics that we can then look at in more detail throughout the next hour. After that introduction, all of our panellists will offer some opening reflections from their perspective about how patients access medicines across England. We'll then come to a wide range of questions. Because we're filming this session in advance, those questions won't be live today, but they have been based on questions submitted through Slido in the run-up to today's event. So thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance. But don't worry, there's still a chance for you to engage today as well. So a few different ways for you to engage in a more interactive way as we go through this session. The first is you can still submit your questions on Slido, and you should be seeing a box or a column to the right-hand side of your screen which connects to the Slido questions. Please do submit questions or vote for other questions, and we'll make sure that the most popular questions from today are answered by our King's Fund Library or by our panellists after today's event, so you'll have a chance to hear from the experts. We'll also, at the start of this session and again right at the end, be doing a quick poll question. And again, that will pop up on the Slido box to the right-hand side. And please just quickly answer the poll question at the start and at the end. And then finally, for those of you who are able to multitask on lots of channels at the same time, by all means, please do tweet from what you hear today and questions you may have. And when you do tweet, please use the hashtag KFOnline. So I hope that's clear about how your time with us for the next hour will run. And I really hope by the end of this hour that you've had a really good opportunity to hear from a range of experts about how access to medicines works currently and what the future agenda could be as well in England. Before I turn to our panellists, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, AbbVie, for making it possible for us to bring today's online event to all of you. So thank you, AbbVie. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask our panellists to introduce themselves briefly. If I could start with Bradley.
Hi, my name's Bradley Price and I'm the Policy and Public Affairs Manager at Sarcoma UK, which is a cancer charity. It's the cancer of the soft tissue and bone.
Thank you for joining us today, Bradley. Dominic.
Hello, everyone. My name's Dominic Pavonka. I'm Head of Health Technology Assessments and Pricing for AbbVie, which is a biopharmaceutical company.
And thank you for joining us, Dominic. Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Catchpole. I'm Value and Access Policy Director at the ABPI. The ABPI is the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, which represents the R&D based industry in the UK. And the ABPI is the voice of the pharmaceutical industry in the UK.
Thank you for joining us, Paul. Nina, could I now ask that you introduce yourself and then explain the system to us in a very simple way so we're all up to speed before we get to hear more from all of you as panellists. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks, Sally. I'll certainly try my best. My name is Nina Pinwell. I'm currently the Acting Commercial Medicines Director at NHS England, and I'm acting up at the moment due to the COVID response at NHS England and NHS Improvement. But my normal job is as Head of Commercial Operations with a concentration on new medicines. So I've got the unenviable task of trying to describe the system in a simple way for how we get medicines to patients in England. So I'm going to try my best to take you through the top line areas that a drug needs to go through, a medicine needs to go through to be able to get to a patient and be prescribed. So one of the first things the system needs to worry about is understanding what's coming down the pipeline, and we call this horizon scanning. So this is so that we can understand what medicines are in development, what trials are going on, and what of those medicines are likely to have the greatest benefits for patients in the NHS. So we try and identify that stuff early, and that can be a number of years before the drug is actually going to be available to patients. But understanding the horizon is very important. Once the next stage is around the trial results and the investigations that have gone on for the medicine, all that evidence being collected, gathered together, analysed and prepared as evidence for the safety of the medicine, how well it works to treat the condition or the illness that it's designed to treat, and then how it's going to be used in the real world, how patients will actually get to access the medicine. So we then move on to the regulatory decision, and in the UK, our regulation of medicines is conducted by an organisation called the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, HRA for short. And it's their job to ensure that medicines meet the applicable standards of safety, quality and efficacy. So that is that they produce the intended result. So if a medicine is considered to meet those standards, it's safe, it's of the right quality, and it does act as described, then the medicine is granted what's called a license or a marketing authorization, and that allows the drug to be prescribed in England. Whilst that regulatory decision is being taken, there's also an assessment of the clinical and cost effectiveness conducted on the medicine, and the organisation that conducts that assessment is called the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE for short. It's their job to gather the best available evidence that is provided to them by patients and clinicians and the company, and they develop recommendations on how that medicine should be used in the health service. Their process includes setting up a group of experts who look at the evidence, make recommendations, and they also consult with professionals, patients and the public on their recommendations. So anyone listening today would have the opportunity to take a look at the recommendations NICE make on all the different medicines they look at and send their comments in. So as part of their decision making, NICE consider the clinical effectiveness, and that is how well the medicine works compared to the other treatments available, and the cost effectiveness, and that is a consideration of how much more the medicine is going to cost the health service compared to the additional benefit it will bring to patients. Whilst NICE is assessing the clinical and cost effectiveness of a medicine, my organisation where I work, NHS England and NHS Improvement, is the payer of the medicine, and it's our job to pay for every medicine that NICE recommends, and that's appropriate because a NICE recommendation to use a medicine means it is a good use of NHS resources. Having said that, it's also our job at NHS England and NHS Improvement to ensure the products are priced responsibly. We need to manage the overall spend on medicines, and we want to drive stronger value for money for taxpayers in drug expenditure. So we do have the opportunity, and on occasion do enter into commercial discussions with companies about certain medicines and negotiate, in some cases, a cheaper price. Once all those steps have been taken, so we know the drug is safe, we know it works, we know it's clinically and cost effective, and potentially we've negotiated a deal on the price for the medicine is then available to be used in the health service and available to clinicians to prescribe to patients. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of timeline, probably from the point a medicine starts its regulatory journey through the assessment phase and through the commercial considerations is around 2 years, 18 months, just to give you a feel for timelines.
Great, thank you very much, Nina. I think you did a very good job explaining a complex system simply. And I guess one of the things to emphasise is I think a lot of people may well have heard of NICE. It quite often is referred to in the news, but what's clear from your description is actually the system for how we access medicines is much more than just what NICE does, and it's really important that all parts of that process work really well to mean that patients get access to medicines that can benefit them. So thank you. Thanks, Nina, for that, setting us up well for the rest of the discussion. So I'm now going to turn to each of our panelists to ask them to really offer their opening reflections on what the system means from their perspective. So I'm going to start with Bradley, who'll be able to give a really important perspective from a patient group. Bradley, over to you.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks, Nina, for a great overview of the system. As Nina mentioned, patients, clinicians, and patient groups sit as experts within the NICE process, and it's important to kind of note that diseases and medicines have much more of an impact than that which is measured within trials. So it's really important to have their lived experience taken into account in this process. One reflection would be a question of, is there enough patient involvement in the process, and is it adequately taken into account when in making the final decision on whether the medicine is approved or not? There are different views, I suppose, across all areas, but importantly, NICE methods review is going on right now, which is looking to address any of the issues that are currently existing within the NICE process, and hopefully this is one that will be addressed.
Great, thank you, Bradley. And just before I turn to Nina to add some reflections from her factual intro, it might just be worth talking. So NICE has been around for about 20 years or so. So it's now become a firm part of the overall system in the NHS in England. But they are undertaking a methods review at this point to think about how they can ensure their processes remain appropriate and fit for the future. So I'm sure it's a topic we will come back to throughout the next 50 minutes or so. So thank you, Bradley. Nina, across to you for your reflections. You've been a very helpful factual guide at the start. Just some more of your reflections from you personally and your organisation.
Thanks, Sally. So I think what I'd reflect on is my 20 years experience working in the system. And Sally's already mentioned NICE has been around for about 20 years, and that is that does correlate to my career because it started at NICE. I joined NICE in the very early days and had a very happy 17 years working there in the area where medicines are assessed. I also enjoyed a very brief time working on a government review called the Accelerated Access Review that was all geared towards how we push through the really impactful medicines for patients, how we accelerate the timeframes to get the products to patients, because medicines take I think, as the COVID experience at the moment is showing, even when you've got the best brains throwing everything at it, medicines take a long time to be developed, trialled, tested, proved safe, assessed, and then paid for and get to patients. So my reflection is definitely about how I've seen the system develop in 20 years, how we've been able to increase the engagement and the conversations. And for me, the solution to all of this is about how we engage as a system, and that includes patients, that includes industry, the pharma companies, that includes the regulator, NICE as the assessor, and NHS England and NHS Improvement as the payer. We need a system that responds to patient need. There is, in my view, not much to be gained from pharmaceutical companies developing products that patients don't actually want and aren't going to bring benefit to patients. I think the health system and patients being able to signal to industry what they're really concerned about, what really matters to them, is an important facet to ensure that the drugs that are being developed, the medicines that are being developed, are actually going to make a difference to patients. And I think these conversations happening as early as possible to set the scene and set us all on the road to ensuring that medicines that patients end up getting really make a proper difference and change lives and improve all sorts of aspects of living is what we should be aiming for.
Great, thank you, Nina, and I'm sure we'll come back to what more we can do throughout the rest of the conversation. So it was clear, as Nina explained the system, that at each step of the process, the horizon scanning, the kind of first safety and efficiency regulatory checks, then the kind of cost and clinical effectiveness, and finally negotiations, that pharmaceutical companies have a huge and important role to play at each of those stages. So now I'm going to turn to Dominic and then to Paul to give their reflections from their organisations about how they see the process and their roles in there. So Dominic, to you first, please.
Thank you. And maybe just to outline my role at AbbVie, and that's really about developing the evidence that NICE requires to assess the cost effectiveness of AbbVie's medicines, and also to work with different stakeholders involved to navigate what is, in some respects, a long process. It's probably worth adding, and I think we've touched on this, that the assessment by NICE and then subsequent negotiations with NHS England is really at the end of a very long process of developing a medicine. And this can take many years, as we've said, from initial discovery and development to preclinical research, then clinical research, and then on to regulatory approval, and then finally the assessment of the medicine's clinical and cost effectiveness by NICE. And as we've heard from Nina as well, it is worth stressing that NICE and the regulator have quite different roles. And I think in many ways, NICE will undertake a broader assessment and ultimately determine whether the medicine represents value for money for the NHS. And we've touched on clinical trials, and they provide really important evidence for both the regulator and NICE. And these trials can take many years of effort for companies and involve collaboration, different stakeholders, researchers, clinicians. And clinical trials for medicines are typically an international endeavour, so that enough patients can be recruited in a timely and efficient manner. And clearly, trials would be ideally designed in such a way that best addresses the evidence requirements of all stakeholders, regulators and HTA bodies. And it is actually possible to seek their advice in designing trials. So, for example, NICE runs a scientific advice service, which enables companies like AbbVie to get input into their development plans at a very early stage. So touching on Nina's point around making sure that what we're bringing forward in terms of development meets the system's needs. I should say, though, that NICE and other similar bodies will require further information than is going to be available in a single trial programme. So, for example, NICE will often need to compare with medicines currently used in the NHS, and they weren't actually necessarily available at the time of the trial programme setup. Or indeed, we might need to look at the evidence over a much longer time period than a trial allows. And certainly in terms of the NICE assessment, we'd need to include specific NHS resources and costs to understand the cost effectiveness of the medicine. So in addition to submitting the trial evidence to NICE, we'll also need to bring together all the other different evidence requirements. And as we've already heard, the NICE process and submissions from companies are heavily scrutinised by experts, and that's before any recommendations are developed. So it's a really robust process, and as a company, we participate to ensure that all the different evidence is provided at the appropriate times. And probably just to add to Nina's point on NICE, it is obviously incredibly important in terms of recommendations within the NHS, but it also has significance internationally, which relates to its established and published methods, and also its high degree of transparency in reporting. So during an appraisal, at the end of an appraisal, recommendations are published, as is all the different evidence and considerations about a medicine. So that's publicly available, should of course someone wish to read what is often thousands of pages of sometimes quite technical documentation. And to close, it's also worth highlighting that the work of evidence generation doesn't end after a positive, nice recommendation. For example, AbbVie has supported patient registries in different therapy areas to better understand how our medicines work. And we also work with NHS England and other stakeholders to develop further data using SACT, which is the cancer therapy data set in England.
Great, thank you very much, Dominic. I'm going to try and be on jargon watch because I'm aware that many of our viewers may not know the detail of access to medicine. So you talked about HTA. Could you briefly explain what that is?
Apologies. So HTA, that's Health Technology Assessment, and that's really the work that NICE undertakes. And as we've discussed, it's an assessment of the relative clinical effectiveness and, importantly, the cost effectiveness of a medicine.
Thank you, Dominic. That's really helpful. So then finally, turning to Paul for last but not least of our expert panelists for your opening reflections. Thank you, Paul.
I think that the conversation today is largely about branded medicines produced by the R&D based industry that are in a patent life. And for the process that Nina outlined, every new branded medicine now that comes into the UK really sort of goes through this process, not just once for a particular medicine, but also as more and more medicines are licensed for additional indications or for additional groups of patients or disease areas, also go through the process again for that particular indication. So there might be many pieces of NICE guidance for one individual branded medicine. I just wanted to reflect overall on it was a 6-stage process, I think, that Nina went through, and actually it's really good categorization. The process works really well when all of those stages are joined up and interconnected, and that's a really important reflection, that when everything joins together and we've got a completely aligned system, the UK does pretty well actually, and compared to other countries we can get new medicines to patients fairly quickly if the process works as intended and if it stays joined up and connected. And that's an important challenge to continue to focus on. I also wanted to maybe just talk about something of the international and the local perspective across these 6 stages, because that's quite important to understand as well. The development, the research and development, and manufacturing of new medicines is a global business. It happens across the global pharmaceutical companies. And so the first stage of the process, horizon scanning, it is global. It requires looking at global information and accessing global information about what medicines are in development, what are in clinical trials and in research. And we have one of the most developed horizon scanning systems actually in Europe. We have a large database called UK PharmaScan, which the pharmaceutical industry in the UK uses to notify the system of what new medicines are in development and in clinical trials. And that's used by health technology assessment bodies such as NICE and by other agencies such as NHS England to understand what medicines are coming down the pipeline and how the system needs to plan for the introduction of those medicines. And that's a really important first step in the process that industry fully supports. And actually, it's a good reflection from the challenges of COVID that the UK was in a really good position to understand quickly the kinds of treatments that were being looked at for COVID, in part because we've got such a well-developed horizon scanning system, and all of the agencies involved in that were able to come together quickly and share information. Then we go into the data collection stage. That's essentially about clinical trials. This is a global business too. So countries around the world have to compete to attract patients into clinical trials. And again, this is a global business. So the local affiliate companies of the pharmaceutical company in the UK, they have to work to make the case, to get to get patients onto clinical trials here in the UK. And we have to work together to make the UK as an attractive place as possible so that we can get the benefit of the research that the industry is doing and get patients onto trials. And again, reflections on COVID, we've done really well in getting many patients onto relevant clinical trials that have been set up in an incredibly short time, actually, in response to COVID. This is really important, and it's something that will allow us to learn and reflect about how we can get these learnings into practice so that we continue to get more and more patients into trials and quicker as well. The third piece, the regulatory decision, this is also global too, although in the context of the UK, it's actually more European. So we have the European Medicines Agency, which provides the licensing process for the majority of new medicines. The UK takes part in the European process through the MHRA, and currently the regulatory decision is made on a European level basis. As we move away from the European Union, we need to find new ways of achieving regulatory alignment and connectivity with the EMA. And this is work that's in progress to make sure that we can stay relevant and the UK can maintain its position as a global regulatory body as we go forwards. After we get past the regulatory decision, then we do move into locally specific UK processes. So the process of assessing clinical and cost effectiveness that's done by NICE, that's a UK body, and it uses criteria and judgments that are UK specific in order to come up with a UK coverage decision. And in fact, not just UK, to be perfectly correct, England and Wales, because NICE operates across England and Wales. We do have a separate health technology assessment body called the Scottish Medicines Consortium that assesses new medicines for the benefit of Scottish patients north of the border. Commercial considerations, as Nina said, absolutely important. The new medicines, the innovative new medicines that the industry is bringing to the UK often equally require innovative access arrangement and innovative payment mechanisms. And it's through being able to have mature commercial discussions with NHS England as the payer that we're able to make sure that novel payment arrangements can often be put alongside the novel medicines that they're intended to support. And then finally, the patient access piece, over to the NHS, over to clinicians to reflect and to adopt NICE guidance for new medicines so that all eligible patients that have been deemed able to benefit from a medicine can do so. So those are my reflections on the sort of specific process for medicines. I'd probably add just one final piece, which is also quite important for the industry, that over and above the process for individual medicines, there sits a national scheme, which is called the Voluntary Pricing and Access Scheme, which is a scheme that's negotiated every 5 years between the government and the pharmaceutical industry, which agrees an overarching mechanism for managing all of the NHS expenditure on branded medicines. And that 5-year deal currently sees the industry underwriting all growth on branded medicines expenditure over agreed levels per year, current level being 2% per annum. And industry pays back all amounts of expenditure on branded medicines over that amount. So in order to help address affordability and make sure that the UK is getting value for money from all its expenditure on medicines, we have the local processes for each individual medicine. And then we have this national scheme that sees industry paying back all expenditure over and above agreed levels. To give you an example, in 2019, the industry paid back £842 million over and above the payments for individual medicines. That's £2.3 million a day coming back into the system from the branded pharmaceutical industry to help manage expenditure on new medicines.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. An awful lot there for our viewers to absorb, and clearly demonstrating just how complex and how much collaboration has to happen to mean that medicines can get to patients quickly. So you actually really helpfully talked about the international aspects of a number of the processes. So I wanted to ask Nina around how the system in England differs from the system in other countries across the world. Just to get your reflection, Nina, on kind of how it differs and why in the main it differs from other countries.
Thanks, Sally. So I think from my perspective, the main difference compared to almost every other healthcare system in the world is we are a fully taxpayer funded system. And I think for us, that means the price we pay and the considerations we take as a system to make sure we are getting the right treatments to patients have a stronger bearing in the UK than maybe they do in other countries where there may be a part or full insurance system. I think the NHS is that one-stop shop that is open to all and equal access, again, which is very different to systems across the world. And I think one of the huge challenges for us in the UK and in England is when you see comparisons of how we're doing in a specific disease area or as a health system compared to, say, France, Germany, America, wherever, you're always comparing apples and pears. And I think for those of us that understand, well, I'm not pretending I understand everything, but for those of us that have got knowledge and understanding of the system, it's quite it's such a struggle to explain the complexity and why it's different when you've got the bold headlines of, you know, we're 3 years behind France with our cancer treatment, etc. Because there's a bit more to the story and a bit more explanation rather than the big headline. So I think my takeaway in summary is we are a fully taxpayer funded system, and because of that I think the system operates differently to anywhere else in the world.
Great, thanks, Nina. So very much the first couple of stages that you talked about, that's something that pretty much every advanced healthcare system will have, the pipeline and the safety assessment.
Absolutely.
We're tax funded and therefore need to make decisions about relative priority. We then have the NICE approach and NHS England as the payer, as a kind of, if you like, special processes for England and Wales and equivalents in Scotland. So, okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. I also then wanted to think about the impact of Brexit. So, Paul, you really helpfully talked through how international collaboration is a really important part of many of these steps, particularly in clinical trials, etc. But I wonder if I can now turn to Dominic. I'm not asking you to try and guess what might be the outcome of negotiations happening, not quite in Brussels, but on video conferencing between the UK and Brussels. But which parts of the system will we have to, as the United Kingdom, think about differently or carry out differently because of Brexit? Not necessarily trying to guess how it might change, but what are the bits that might need to change?
Thank you, Sally. And I think you've already said it, but I'll start with the usual Brexit health warning, which is clearly it's still being negotiated. But I would say it is likely to have an impact on patients' access to medicine in some way. But it's obviously too early to know precisely what will change. But I think, and we talked about this already, NICE and the regulator are obviously different bodies, but NICE's timelines are linked to regulatory approval. And as Paul mentioned, I think what we're going to see with Brexit is clearly a change in terms of the regulation of medicines. But as yet, the implications of that are not clear. But obviously, we don't want any changes in terms of that process to delay patients accessing new medicines. I would say that AbbVie and other companies are working to make the case for the UK to have the best possible relationship with the EU for all stakeholders, patients, public health, and the life science sector. And I do understand that the UK and the EU have agreed to explore medicines cooperation in the future. And we remain optimistic that both sides will be pragmatic about the need to work together on what are essential aspects of medicines regulation. And I think we also share the government's ambition of making the UK a leading global hub for life sciences.
Great, thank you, Dominic. So some likely changes required to our regulatory approach, but that might not necessarily mean it looks dramatically different from now. And a really important point about making sure this doesn't add time between the kind of pipeline and patients being able to benefit. Thank you very much. So I'm going to move on from thinking about kind of our system in relation to international issues and to really come to the heart of what's at the matter of all of this, which is patients. So I think where people have heard about NICE in particular, about how access to medicines work, it probably would have been NICE decisions either saying, yes, the NHS can use this drug, or no, no, it can't. And that's a kind of system where I think we can all understand it in the abstract way, why it's fair in the broader sense, but it can be really hard when it's the drug that you might benefit from yourself or a family might benefit. And when that gets a no, it might feel much harder to justify. So I wanted to turn to Bradley just to understand from a being part of a patient organisation, kind of how do you help patients understand that kind of how the system works, and how does it feel for patients when something that feels fair in the abstract way might equally mean it's a really hard decision for an individual to have to take in terms of not being able to access medicines that they feel they could benefit from. So just Bradley, I'm interested for how this feels for patients.
Absolutely. Well, sadly, sometimes, whether it's due to cost or sometimes due to the clinical effectiveness, medicines will be turned down by NICE, and that can be absolutely devastating for patients, particularly those who have limited treatment options, where this medicine, could have a real marked impact on their quality of life, or it could extend their life. But we have to kind of explain to patients that we understand there's not an unlimited pot of money that we can throw towards medicines. And as mean as that sounds to say, NICE plays a real key role in making sure that the health system can continue to function and also approve the best possible medicines for patients.
Great, thank you, Bradley. So clearly the outcome of decisions from NICE is of critical importance to patients. So you talked about this briefly in your opening remarks, but how can patients get involved in those kind of critical decisions, and how is the patient voice and the impact on patients kind of really driving some of those decisions?
So, well, patient voice is and should be essential to the process. As I've mentioned, and as you picked up, these are the people on which will really get the impact of the medicines or not, as the case may be. They have lived experience of the disease and of the other medicines that they may be required to be on for a long time if the medicine doesn't go through, or which they may go to, which may not be quite as effective. There are loads of areas which aren't picked up by quality of life or side effects, which are measured in trials, that really have a massive impact on their lives. So this could be things like regularly having to travel 50 miles to your hospital because you have to go and see a real specialist team, the side effects of the currently available treatments, which often aren't taken into account, or the impact on their ability to go to work or school, or on their mental health. So there are lots of ways to be involved. Once the medicine is referred by the Department of Health and Social Care and enters the NICE appraisal process, the patients or patient groups can comment on a number of areas. So they can comment on a scope about the medicine, which sets out exactly what the appraiser will consider, if it's looking at the right areas, if the right kind of indicators are being considered within that. They can also give a submission once they moved on to the next stage, which looks at the suitability of current medicines, the impact on their life, and also quality considerations. And they can also be nominated to sit on the committee on the days when they're looking at the medicine and answer questions from the people who have votes whether the medicine or drug will be approved. And they can really give their point of view. And patient groups are a real kind of linchpin within that. They can collect all of these different experiences, synthesize them, and try and put these forward concisely to the regulators. NICE do a very good job of going out to different stakeholders, and they've really kind of upped their game in recent years in terms of searching out the right patient groups and the right patients. But you can look online, there's a list of all the things that they're currently looking at and considering, and you can register yourself as a stakeholder who can comment.
Great, thank you very much, Bradley. And this might be a cheeky question, but if you could improve one thing to make the patient voice clearer, louder in the process, do you have a thing that's on the top of your wish list?
I think for me, there's two things, if I could be cheeky in return and offer you two. Firstly is some kind of extra step in the process, potentially for orphan diseases, so those which are very rare, or end-of-life medicines, which would be similar to the patient and clinician experience step in the Scottish medicine process, with PACE for short, which is where they really go the extra mile to tease out what the issues are for the patients, what is important to them, what impact the new drug could have, and what the kind of devastating consequences potentially could be if they don't get access to this drug. And then the other side of things in a more formal process would be that there's no official way by which the patient views are taken into account, or how it's measured against how the appraisal is done. So you can contribute, like I've said, but what we really need is a framework which can synthesize qualitative data like patient experience alongside the quantitative data which comes from the trials.
Great, thank you, Bradley. I think there are good two wishes, so I'll definitely let you have that second one.
Thank you.
But I think through those questions, what we've kind of seen is these decisions have a tremendous impact on individual patients and on patient groups. So the absolute importance of hearing the patient's voice and understanding their lived experience as those decisions are made are really important, and some useful resources Bradley's pointed us to make sure they are engaged. Thank you. I'm next going to move on to Nina and ask her a question, really, I suppose, as both sort of at her time at NICE and now more at the time at NHS England, as the sort of system owner or the system steward of all of this, you've got the pretty unenviable task of trying to balance lots of competing priorities. So I was really interested in, how do you balance the competing goals of giving patients access quickly to the right medicines with creating the right environment that's incentivizing the development of new products, but also ensuring the expenditure is affordable to the NHS, because that sounds like quite a hard trio of things to keep in balance. So how do you do that?
Okay, so I think this is the main function of the area I work in and the team I lead, and it's all about ensuring that the fixed budget, the fixed spend, the taxpayers' money that we have to spend on medicines is done appropriately on the most effective treatments, because there isn't an endless pot of money. So that's the kind of focus of a lot of the activity in my area.
Great, thank you very much, Nina. And I think after that, I definitely don't want your job. That sounds fun. But a really helpful reflection on the kind of dilemmas that you and your team are trying to manage each day. So the next kind of area I wanted to think about was the new government. So I know it's hard to believe because COVID-19 has changed everybody's concept of time, but it is only 6 months ago that the country elected a new government, Boris Johnson Conservative government. It does feel like that was about 6 years ago now because of COVID-19. But I'm interested to hear, particularly from Dominic, Paul and Nina, about what the new government's agenda means for improving access to medicines and support for the life sciences industry more generally. I should start by obviously saying none of you are civil servants. You're not speaking on behalf of government. It's more, I'm just interested in kind of what do you see as their agenda? And obviously some of that, the pace of it might change because of COVID-19, but what do you think the plan was kind of back in December? So might start, shall I start with Nina? And then I'll move on to Dominic and then Paul on that.
Signalled in the Conservative manifesto that I have particular interest in and am currently working on was something called the Innovative Medicines Fund. the manifesto reflected on the success of the Cancer Drugs Fund to date, and wanting to build on that success to develop a fund that isn't just for cancer, it's for other disease areas too. And having had quite a lot of responsibility for the Cancer Drugs Fund since it was refreshed back in 2016, I unsurprisingly am quite a fan and think it's marvellous. So having an expansion beyond cancer and having that opportunity for there to be a holding point while more data is developed for a potentially excellent treatment for patients, I think is the right direction of travel. So what we're doing at the moment is developing a consultation document that will go out to the public that outlines the principles of how the fund will operate, how it's going to work, and that will go out for public consultation. And as normal, we'll get the comments back, consider those comments and develop our ideas further. I think probably there's a very clear signal in the Conservative manifesto that says it's building on the Cancer Drugs Fund, and that is the blueprint for the way forward. So I think generally speaking, people who already understand the Cancer Drugs Fund will have an idea of how it's likely to look. But that is the beauty of being able to go out to consultation and allow people the opportunity to comment on the details. Haven't got any particular timelines around that. Did have some decent timelines around that, but then COVID-19 happened. But just to reassure people, it hasn't been forgotten. The government certainly haven't forgotten it. And I would hope, depending on whether a second wave of COVID comes along or not, I would hope there would be something coming out before the end of the year for people to comment on, and there'll be further details to follow.
Great, thank you, Nina. And that's the IMF potentially continuing the health services love for three-letter abbreviations, which we do seem to like. So thank you, Nina. And if I could then come to Dominic, from your perspective, from AbbVie's perspective, what do you see as the government's agenda on access to medicines and life sciences?
So I'll try and avoid too many three-letter acronyms in my answer, but maybe just to start and say, just reflecting on the huge progress that has been made over the last 20 years or so, particularly in cancer. And I think what we've seen is patient outcomes improving, in many ways during the first part of the century. And I think that obviously relies on bringing new medicines, new innovation. And I think the UK government has set out an ambition to create an environment, a policy environment that does keep pace with what are sometimes very complex treatments. And certainly AbbVie supports government initiatives like the Cancer Drugs Fund, obviously the fund Nina's mentioned, and other things such as the Early Access to Medicine scheme. And really, we've supported these schemes and support these developments to ensure that patients do get earlier access to what are important medicines.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I was going to turn to Paul, but actually I'm a bit aware of time, so I might combine some questions with Paul. So I guess kind of moving on from the government's agenda about improving access to medicines, I wanted just to end in the questions session by thinking about medicines are becoming more and more innovative, which is obviously fantastic for patients. But I'm just interested to think through, what does that mean for our approach to access to medicines, how we can make sure the approach is fit for the future as well as fit for kind of medicines in the pipeline now. So just wanted to hear from Bradley and Paul on that. And obviously, Paul, if you want to chip in on anything about the government agenda, please do. So maybe if I start with Paul and then move to Bradley.
In terms of the government's agenda, I think broadly, the government is trying to make the UK the most attractive place possible as a destination for the, not just the pharmaceutical industry, but for the broader life sciences industry. So it does that through a document called the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy, which was already developed actually quite a few years really, we've been implementing it, and it covers everything from the research and development piece, the clinical trials piece, the basic science piece, and crucially manufacturing. How do we attract manufacturing here into the UK, right through into the access space for medicines? And clearly, as we, the same theme we talked about earlier, it has to be a joined up and an end-to-end process. There's no point researching and developing new medicines in the UK if then they come to sit on the shelf and patients in the NHS can't get access to them. So we have to make sure everything is joined up end to end. And that's what the industrial strategy helps us to do. Things have moved on incredibly, obviously, over the last 3 or 4 months. And, I think everybody is reflecting now, how will the life sciences industrial strategy for the UK need to evolve and change in a post-COVID world? And I think some of the discussions on that are starting now. It's been, incredibly helpful to reflect on the great position that we're in the UK, but to maintain that position and to build it further, there really is a lot to do. We can't take our foot off the accelerator, and that takes us into, back into the access piece. So one of the important commitments is also to try and evolve the way that NICE looks at new medicines. So NICE has a thing called, it has a process which sets out the step-by-step process for undertaking an appraisal, but it has this thing called method as well, NICE methods, which set out the methodological, the technical process, if you like, for assessing new medicines. And largely that process it's got quite a narrow focus. It's fixed very much around health gain and this concept of quality adjusted life years, which hopefully some of the audience will be familiar with. But it provides a pretty specific perspective on a medicine. And I think the narrative now is trying to take that a bit more broader to say, actually, medicines add value in many other areas other than just in the context of quality adjusted life years and health gain. There are many things that patients value, particularly that are not captured in a QALY. There are many things that medicines bring, and these things need to be more sort of formally captured, and ideally, incorporated into NICE methods. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about at the moment. Maybe the final reflection on COVID is, I think it's never been so clear to me that we need to ask the question again: are we valuing health appropriately, and are we valuing interventions like medicines appropriately? Because if you look at the broader impact of needing to find cures for things like COVID, this is not just a health benefit. This is an impact on society, on productivity, on getting people to work, way, way beyond just simple metrics of quality adjusted life years. And I think we have the opportunity to open up this dialogue and explore it in the context of how the UK evaluates new medicines, which would allow us in a post-Brexit world to really retain our world-leading status in this area of health technology assessment.
Great, thank you, Paul. And that's kind of echoing nicely a number of the points Bradley made at the start about what patients value. But Bradley, just before I come to the conclusion, is there anything else you'd like to add about that kind of in the fit for the future innovative space, what that might mean for patients?
Yeah, thank you. I guess tying together a number of different strands that we've covered today, medicines are becoming more personalized. We're finding that, with the creation and the implementation of the genomics medicine service throughout England, you can try and treat diseases by different genetic or genomic abnormalities that you have within your tumor or within your body. And this means that it's going to be so specific to certain patients or certain groups that it's going to be difficult to find enough people for the trials. So international collaboration, I think, for not just for rare diseases, but as we look at genomic medicines, it's absolutely essential. And also having the appraisal system set up to adequately deal with these small patient populations within trials and different reimbursement methods and companion diagnostics, things that come along with these specific medicines and more targeted medicines, is just going to be essential.
Great, thank you, Bradley, really helpful. So thank you everybody for today. I'm going to bring us towards our conclusion. This is probably a particularly difficult task for each of the panelists, but just want to give you the opportunity to offer your final thoughts or reflections in kind of 1 or 2 sentences and no more about kind of, in effect, your hopes for access to medicines in the future. So I think I will reverse the order that I started with, just to keep everybody on their toes. So I'll start with Paul, go Paul, Dominic, Nina, and then end with Bradley, if that's okay. So Paul, over to you on your aspirations.
I think one word really, which is collaboration. I think if you look at everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 months, then this is the word that comes through very clearly, that it's only through collaborations that we're going to get through the challenging times that we're in at the minute and find a way forward. And this applies across all of life sciences. It applies across all of the system partners that we're working with in the UK. And that's my clear message.
Great, thank you. Dominic.
I think I'll just really echo Paul's words around collaboration. And I guess my ask going forwards would be for this collaboration to continue in relation to challenges we face and will face in other areas of health. And also to ensure alignment across different NHS processes and initiatives that can support faster and more streamlined access for patients to important treatments.
Thank you. Nina.
Thanks, Sally. So I think for me, the buzzwords are around restoration and recovery. And in my experience, I don't think we've seen a more collaborative time. I know I'm echoing the last 2 gentlemen, but the system operating as a system, working towards the same goals, we're so much bigger than the sum of our parts, and that's how we're going to get success.
Great, thank you. And then finally, Bradley, are you joining the collaboration club, or do you have a different reflection?
I mean, I can't help but join it. I mean, it's something that's so essential, and it's something that is definitely improving. And I think if I can add another buzzword to it, it would probably be evolution. So, you know, we've got a lot of fantastic processes in place, but as things start to change or continue to change, we need to make sure that we're changing along with them and working together to achieve that.
Great, thank you very much. So it's now time for me to thank all of our panelists for such good contributions today. So thank you to Bradley, to Nina, to Dominic and Paul. I really appreciate your time. Thank you to our sponsor, AbbVie, for making today possible. And finally, a big thank you to our audience for engaging with us today. Just a few final reminders on housekeeping. The King's Fund Library will put out answers to the most popular questions that have come through on Slido. They'll be ably assisted by some of our panelists in answering those questions. They'll be up in the website in the next couple of days. This recording will be available on demand, so please do share it with colleagues that you think might appreciate and benefit from today's session. And then finally, there should be a very short questionnaire that will pop up on your screen, right at the bottom of the screen, where we'd really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes just to be able to give us some feedback, because that will help us be able to improve these events as we go forward. So thank you very much for your time today and for joining us, and I hope that you've had a useful hour and understand a bit more about how patients access medicines here in England. Thank you for your time.